Hey everyone, welcome to your channel, Virgo. Thank you so much for being here. Okay, let's start the reading. There is a particular kind of silence that is not empty. It only appears that way from the outside. From the inside, for the person carrying it, for the situation holding it, for the connection that has been living inside it, that silence is dense with everything that hasn't yet found its way through, dense with feeling that has no current outlet, dense with truth that has been carefully, sometimes exhaustingly, kept from the surface. And some of you have been living adjacent to exactly that kind of silence. Not the peaceful kind, the pressurized kind, the kind that builds and builds in the sealed space between what is actually present and what has been allowed to be spoken, until the moment when the pressure finally exceeds the containment. And then, without warning, without the gradual approach that the mind tends to prefer, something breaks through. Something arrives that the silence had been holding all along, released all at once into the open air between two people, changing everything it touches. If this found you today, I think something in you has already been feeling the particular weight of a silence that wasn't as empty as it appeared. A theme appearing strongly in this reflection is the energy of a revelation that has been building in the unseen, because nothing that arrives suddenly was ever truly sudden. The appearance of suddenness belongs to the moment of breakthrough, to the specific instant when something that had been contained finally crosses into visibility. But the content of what is revealed was never sudden. It was always there, always present, always shaping the landscape of a situation from within its own concealment. And a pattern worth noticing here is that the most significant revelations, the ones that genuinely reorganize a person's understanding of a connection or a situation, are almost always characterized in retrospect by that particular quality of being always true, of a truth that once known seems impossible to imagine not having known. As if the understanding was waiting, perfectly formed, for exactly the moment when the conditions finally allowed it to arrive. An energy that may be present for many of you right now is the specific disorientation of standing in the aftermath of something that landed without warning and now requires the landscape of your understanding to be entirely redrawn, not partially revised, not updated around the edges, but genuinely, fundamentally redrawn. The kind of redrawn that asks a person to sit down, metaphorically, or perhaps literally, and simply breathe for a moment before attempting to make sense of the new picture. Because the new picture is different from the old one in ways that take time to fully register, and the full registration of it cannot be rushed. It has its own speed, its own internal logic, its own requirement for a quality of stillness and patience that the initial shock of the arrival tends to make very difficult to access. A pattern that sometimes emerges in the immediate wake of a significant reveal is that the mind moves quickly, sometimes frantically, toward the work of recontextualization, looking back through the archive of everything that came before this moment and seeing it differently, noticing what the previous framework made invisible, understanding with a clarity that wasn't available before why certain things felt slightly off, or why certain explanations never quite resolved the unease, or why a particular quality of uncertainty persisted despite all reasonable efforts to dispel it. And while that recontextualization can feel vertiginous, it is also underneath the dizziness of it a form of relief, the particular relief of a picture that finally makes internal sense. And this is worth sitting with. Because for many people who have been inside a situation that carried an unnameable quality of incompleteness, where the official story and the felt experience were somehow just slightly not quite matching the arrival of more complete information, however disorienting in its form, can produce something that feels almost paradoxically like rest. The rest of no longer needing to reconcile two versions of reality, the rest of no longer managing the low-level cognitive labor of holding an uncertain picture together through sheer willpower, the rest of finally being allowed to know what you were already, in some quiet part of yourself, already sensing. And that rest, even in the middle of everything else the revelation has set in motion, deserves to be recognized as one of the genuine gifts that honesty, even difficult honesty, tends to bring. This reflection invites you to consider what in the situation or connection that is present in this reflection had been generating a low-level sense of something not quite fitting, some persistent, almost imperceptible awareness that the picture as presented was not the whole picture, and whether the arrival of more complete information, however disorienting, is ultimately a form of the clarity you have been needing. Here's the thing about shock. It is, at its core, the experience of reality departing significantly from expectation. And the intensity of that experience is directly proportional to the gap between the two, between what was expected and what arrived, which means that the most shocking reveals are the ones that occurred within a context of high trust or high certainty or a particularly solid seeming version of what was believed to be true. The shock is not simply about the content of what is revealed. It is about the size of the distance between the familiar and the suddenly unfamiliar, between the story that was being lived and the story that has now replaced it. And navigating that distance, finding the internal ground on the other side of a significant reordering of one's understanding, requires a quality of patience and self-compassion that the initial intensity of the moment rarely makes easy to access, but that the longer arc of processing absolutely depends upon. An energy that may be present here is the invitation to extend that quality of patience and self-compassion to yourself in this period, not rushing toward resolution, not demanding of yourself that you arrive at a definitive interpretation before the full dimensions of what has been revealed have had time to be genuinely absorbed. Shock moves through a person at its own pace. Understanding follows shock at its own pace, and the quality of the understanding that eventually emerges tends to be proportionate to the quality of the space given to the processing, meaning the less this is rushed, the more accurate and the more genuinely useful the eventual clarity is likely to be. This reflection invites you to consider what you actually need in the immediate aftermath of something that significantly disrupted your previous understanding, not what you think you should need or what would look most composed from the outside, but what your actual interior experience is asking for in order to move through this with the care it deserves. An energy that may be present in this moment is also one that is worth naming carefully. Because significant reveals the kind that arrive after extended silence, the kind that change things tend to produce a complex emotional response that resists simple categorization. It is rarely only shock. It is rarely only relief. It tends to be a mixture of things that don't obviously belong together, and that may need to coexist for some time before they begin to resolve into something more coherent. There may be anger alongside understanding, grief alongside clarity, gratitude for finally knowing alongside pain at what the knowing cost, disorientation alongside the strange, slightly vertiginous sense of a fog lifting. All of these things are legitimate, all of them are real. And an energy appearing here is the gentle but important suggestion that none of them needs to be suppressed or resolved ahead of its natural timing in order for the processing to be done correctly. There is no correct. There is only honestly, and honestly, in the wake of something significant, tends to require space for the full complexity of what is felt. Something worth sitting with here is the distinction between a reveal that damages and a reveal that clarifies, because from inside the immediate experience of a shocking disclosure, those two things can feel identical. Both produce disruption, both require the previous understanding to be revised. Both ask for something from the person receiving them that the comfortable equilibrium of the previous state did not, but they are not the same. A reveal that damages leaves a person with less than they had before. A reveal that clarifies leaves a person with more information, more accuracy, more of the complete picture that the previous state was withholding. And while the clarity may be painful in the arriving, the thing it leaves in its wake, the more honest, more complete, more accurately grounded understanding of a situation or a person tends to be more useful than the comfortable version of events it replaced. A theme worth sitting with here is the particular resilience required to receive unexpected information about something that matters and to stay in the complexity of processing it rather than reaching immediately for the exits. Because there are exits available in moments like this. The exit of deciding what something means before it has been fully understood. The exit of collapsing into a single emotion and allowing that emotion to make all subsequent decisions. The exit of constructing a rapid, simplified narrative that reduces the complexity of what has arrived into something more manageable at the cost of the accuracy that the full complexity would eventually have provided. And an energy appearing here is the suggestion that none of those exits serve you as well as the harder, slower, more demanding work of staying present with the full weight of what has arrived. This reflection invites you to consider what it would mean to resist the pull toward a premature conclusion about what this reveal means to stay in the uncertain, unsettled space of not yet fully knowing long enough that the understanding that eventually emerges has the full picture available to it, rather than only the portion that was easy to absorb quickly. And this is where it gets both tender and important, because the silence that preceded the reveal, whatever its specific quality, whatever its duration, whatever its particular weight in the context of your situation, was doing something that silence in a charged connection always does. It was holding pressure. It was containing something that needed to be contained until the conditions for its release were sufficient. And the breaking of that silence, however dramatic or disorienting the arrival of what was held within it, represents a movement from the pressurized state to the open one, from concealment to visibility, from the particular weight of not knowing to the different, more navigable weight of knowing. And while the knowing may be difficult, it is almost always preferable to the pressurized not knowing that preceded it, because it is real. And real, however demanding, tends to be more livable than the careful management of a constructed alternative. An energy appearing here is the sense that what has emerged from the silence, whatever its specific content, whatever it asks of you in terms of response and integration and eventual decision, is carrying something that was always meant to be known, something that could not remain where it was indefinitely, something that the situation itself, in its own intelligence, was always moving toward releasing. And the fact that it has been released, that the silence has broken, that the reveal has arrived, represents not a disaster but a threshold, the beginning of a chapter that operates on a more honest foundation than the one that preceded it, and the beginning of a new chapter, even one that starts in the disorientation of a significant reveal, contains within it a particular kind of freedom that the previous chapter, however familiar, did not. The freedom of no longer needing to navigate around an unspoken thing, the freedom of having the actual picture rather than the managed version of it, the freedom of being able to make decisions about this connection, about this situation, about what you want and what you are willing to move toward from a place of genuine information rather than from the carefully constructed surface of something that was always more complicated beneath. That freedom, when it is finally fully felt, tends to be worth considerably more than the comfort of the previous state. This reflection invites you to consider what kind of person you want to be on the other side of this, how you want to have navigated this particular threshold, what you want to have understood and honored and remain true to in yourself as you move through it, and whether the choices available to you right now align with that version of yourself. The closing energy of this reflection is one of steady, quiet groundedness in the face of genuine complexity. Not the groundedness of someone who has resolved everything, not the performed composure of someone managing their response for an audience, but the deep, unhurried, entirely private groundedness of a person who understands that what has arrived, however it arrived, whatever it contains, is something they have the interior resources to meet, who understands that disruption, even significant disruption, is not the same as destruction, that a reordering of understanding, even a dramatic one, is not the end of something. It is the clearing of a space, the removal of a weight, the beginning of a relationship with a situation or a person or a version of yourself that is built on more complete information than was previously available. You have navigated significant things before. You have stood in the aftermath of moments that reorganized your understanding and found eventually that the new understanding was more solid than the old one, more honest, more capable of bearing the weight of what came after it. And what is required of you now is not the absence of feeling. It is not the immediate resolution of everything the reveal has set in motion. It is simply the willingness to be present for your own experience of it, to honor the complexity of what you feel, to trust that the processing, given the space and patience it deserves, will bring you to a place of greater clarity than you can currently access from inside the initial intensity of the moment. And that clarity, the kind that arrives after a significant disruption has been genuinely processed, not managed or bypassed or resolved prematurely tends to carry a quality of solidity that few other forms of understanding can match because it was earned, because it passed through the full weight of the experience rather than around it. Because the person who arrives at that clarity on the other side of this particular threshold will be someone who knows something real about themselves, about their capacity to hold complexity, about their resilience, about the specific quality of integrity they were able to bring to a genuinely demanding moment. And that self-knowledge, however quietly it arrives, tends to be one of the most lasting and valuable things that difficult thresholds have to offer. This reflection invites you to consider what this moment, the silence, the sudden reveal, the disruption, and the clarity and everything being asked of you in its wake is ultimately teaching you about yourself, and whether you can hold that learning with the same care and attention you are giving to everything else this threshold contains. The silence has broken. Something that was always true is now visible. And you, exactly as you are, with exactly the resources you have built through everything you have already survived and integrated, are more than equal to what this moment is asking of you. Trust that completely and without apology. Trust that.